Hello everyone and welcome to this video. This is going to be the easiest tutorial you can find over the internet to get started with React and Redux, specifically with the best practices, that is today using Redux Toolkit. So without further ado, I'm gonna get directly to the tutorial, but I want to tell you, if you like this video at the end, you need to press the thumbs up button and subscribe to the channel. Now let's get started. So in here, what we want to do is we're gonna go to our terminal and then we are going to create a new project. So I'm gonna use npm create Vite at latest, and essentially this takes the latest Vite, and then we can say React Redux as the project, or React RTK, let's call this. Then we are going to use React, and then we are going to also use TypeScript in this case, because obviously TypeScript is the choice for today. So I'm going to go for opening this into VS Code, so we can say React RTK, and RTK basically is Redux Toolkit. Now that we have this open, I want to install the dependencies, so I can say npm I, and this should install the dependencies for us. But by default, we basically get the application with some things installed automatically and some folder structure and file structure as well. So I'm going to now run npm run dev, which essentially should spin up the Vite server. And now I should be able to see my cool React application right from here. You can see that this says Vite plus React, has some logos and some magic. Let's clean up the application really quickly, and then we are going to start implementing Redux. So I'm going to go to app.tsx and I'm going to make a bunch of changes. First of all, I don't really want this top div with the logos, so I'm going to remove those. Then I also want to change this to say something like notifications count, because the application we are going to have is going to show some notifications count. And then this is, let's say, set to 0 at the beginning, or you could also set this to, let's say, count by default. And then this is set to 0. Now I want to change the button to say something like increment, and then I also want to have a button that also says decrement, or not decrement, but let's say reset. And this one should essentially just set the count to 0 right here, just like this. I don't want this edit one, and I don't want this p tag as well. And what I also want this card to have is essentially a display of flex, but we are going to have a look at that in just a bit. Now that I have this, you can see those buttons are actually aligned together. So what I'm going to do is, for the card, I'm going to go to the CSS, find the card style, and here I'm also going to give this a display of flex and a gap of 16 pixel. So we have some sort of spacing between those. And I'm also going to say the justify content of this should be center, so they are sort of centered now. Now that we have those buttons, you can see that I can increment and reset as well, just like this. But let's do this with Redux Toolkit. So how does Redux basically work? The basic idea is that we have one single object that is in Redux. So I'm going to explain to you really quickly if you don't know Redux, but if you already know, you can just skip to the next section. So I have this application that was created or last updated in 2017 actually. So if I refresh this application, it has a bunch of messages. If I ask you what is the state of this application, the state essentially means what changes throughout this app. If I say this and add something, now the state has changed from having 4 messages to 5. How do I look at that in terms of Redux? This is a really cool Redux extension that we are going to look at later as well, but this is not really compatible with the latest Redux because, yeah, it was updated in 2017, this project. So if you look at the state and the tree itself, the state essentially is a huge object, or not a huge object, but a JavaScript object that contains a messages property. The messages property is an array of 5 items right now. Before I added a message, if I go to the previous state, it had 4 messages. After I've added a new message, it got 5 messages. I can see the difference that this particular action made, that is adding a new item to the messages array. And this is really interesting information. You might not already know that, how to use the extension till now. So that means that I have something that is called a state, which is essentially a JavaScript object inside which I have different things. In this app, the focus is the messages array in my state. Where this state lives theoretically is called a store. And the only thing that can change or update the value of this state is an action. For example, when the add message action was dispatched, then there was a difference created within the state, that is, a new message was added. Similarly, if I go and remove a particular element, you can also see that this remove message action was dispatched, and this essentially triggered this change in the state that removed the second item, or the item that I removed with the ID2, for example. The action can also be seen here, but we are going to have a look at that as well. This is an action that has two things: a type, which is the identifier, like what is the action really? It's a remove message action. This one is an add message action. And any action can have a payload to support the action type. But we're gonna go to that a bit later. Now that we know how Redux looks like, or what are the actions, state, and yeah, sort of the store as well, theoretically, we're gonna go into actually implementing Redux Toolkit. So you go to Redux Toolkit JS org, and then you can go to get started. And when you go there, the first thing you're going to see is installing these two packages, Redux JS Toolkit and React Redux. So I'm going to actually install both. We're going to go to our code, open a new terminal, because in this one we are running Vite. And then I can go simply and say npm install this, and React Redux is also required here. Once we have both of them installed, I'm just going to go ahead and restart my Vite server just to make sure that dependencies are now loaded. I don't really think I have to restart, but yeah, I just did. Now that I have that, I need to create this store that we just talked about. Where does this whole state that we just looked at, where does this really live? So this has to have a store that we need to configure. So we're going to start with that. So if you go to TypeScript quick start from the documentation, you're going to find the initial setup for our store. So I'm going to actually copy this. I'm going to go to our code, and here I'm going to create a file called, or a folder called store. Inside that, I'm going to create a new file called index.ts. And in here, I can quickly go and put that. You can also rename to store.ts. That's also perfectly fine. Now, if you look at this, the store file uses the configure store function to create a store. The object that you see here is actually having a reducer that has a nested object, and this is the exact object that is going to be created right here, but a bit differently, not exact, to be honest. If I go to the state, you can see there's a messages array. If I wanted messages here, I would say messages instead of posts, and this basically creates a property of messages here. But then it takes a reducer. This is an array. What are we talking about here? I'm going to tell you. Hold your horses. So here, messages requires a reducer. What usually happens in Redux is the following: component or components dispatch actions. Actions are caught by reducers, which are functions. Reducers change the state. Components get the updated state. And before all of that, we have reducers are configured with initial state. Actions are created. These are the two things. So we first need to create reducers with the initial state. We need to have actions created. Then the component can dispatch actions. The actions are basically caught by reducers. Reducers change the state. Components get the updated state using something called selectors. We're going to have a look at that as well. But where are the reducers? We don't have one at the moment. If we look at the tutorial, specifically TypeScript quick start, you can see the define slice state and action types. This is what I'm going to copy. So I'm going to copy this one, and I'm going to go and create a folder here. I'm going to call this notifications. And in here, we are going to say notifications.slice.ts. In here, I'm going to basically create this. And now I want you to look at all the code that we have here. First of all, since we want to have in our application some sort of notifications like this, and the thing that we want actually right here is not something like this, but rather a notifications object that contains a count value that is 0 or 10 or whatever, and that gets updated. So first of all, this is supposed to be notifications. That's why in here we have notifications, not messages. Secondly, this has to have an object that contains a count property. So then in my slice, the state type is gonna have a count value that's going to be of number. I'm going to rename this variable. You can press F2, and then you can say notifications state. Now this needs to be count as well. And then this needs to be changed to notifications slide. So I'm going to say notifications slice. Now that we have this, when we call the increment method, we want the state.count value to be updated. When we call the reset method, the count should equal to 0. And we don't have this function at all. We're not going to talk about that at the moment. Now that we have created this slice, you can see that the reducers object here has actions. These are actions. Increment is an action that updates the state. Reset is an action that updates the state. But anything that updates the state is essentially called a reducer, or the function itself is called a reducer. So this is a reducer essentially, but this is converted by the Redux toolkit to actions, which you see right here. So in here I can say take out the increment action, take out the reset action, and you can mouse over and see them as well. So this increment is essentially a reducer function. This increment is different. This is essentially an action creator. So it's an action essentially. And I'm going to remove this value from here. I'm going to take this out at the moment. So all we need to do right now is to understand that we are creating a slice, notification slice. We have a initial state. We have the state type right here. And then you can also see that we are exporting two things. The named exports contain the actions, and the default export contains the reducer, which means now I can go to my store and here I can say, hey, I just want to get that notification reducers. I can say import from, and here you can essentially say notifications reducer from, and here you can define that I want from the notification slice the reducer. You can call this whatever essentially, because this is a default export, but I can go here and say notifications reducer, and you can see everything is set up. Now that I save this file, would everything work? No. We have configured the store. Perfect. We have configured the slice as well. Really good. But this store, this Redux store, has no connection whatsoever with our React application. We have just created some TypeScript files that are disconnected with everything. How do we connect those? We go to main TSX and we wrap our whole application inside a provider from React Redux. And here my app's gonna go inside. Now we need to tell this provider what is the store that we are going to use. So the store prop for the provider needs to have our store coming. Now you can rename this to call it whatever, to be honest. You could call it awesome store and that would be fine. So awesome store, perfectly fine. Change here, also change right in the main.tsx. So now that we have the store configured, now we can look at the application. So if I go here to my Vite app, open the Redux extension, you can see first that the redux-devtools are working, and you can Google redux-devtools and install the extension, and then you should be able to see it right here. Now you can see that I have the notifications and count 0. By the way, this was my app. I was just coding right here, but essentially the state is not notifications here, it's messages. But if I refresh here, it's essentially notifications. So if I go to Redux, here you can see that the state that we have is notifications or raw, just like this. Now, if you try to go into the store and change it to something else, like something else, you can see this is something else. All right. Same goes with the object inside as well. If you go to actually the slice and you change the value of the initial state, for example, you introduce something else here as well. For example, something else property, which is a string, then you can definitely go here and then say this says async, and now you have both of them in the state. So you can configure your initial state and just put it out there. I'm going to remove this. I don't want this there. Okay, so now that we have notifications and count right here, now we can also talk about actions. How do we dispatch those actions or use those actions for that matter? So the actions are being exported from here automatically. So we need to first make sure that we are using this count and we are showing this in the app before even dispatching actions. Now, if I go to my app TSX, you can see that it has its local state using useState. We don't want that. We're going to remove useState because now we are getting the state from Redux. So how does this count come here? You're going to essentially create a selector for this. For this, I'm going to go here and I'm going to say notifications.selectors.ts. And now I'm going to look at what I copied before, which essentially had some selectors. So this one, I'm going to actually copy this select count and I'm going to paste it right here. Now you can see here we have a function that takes the root state. So if you click this button, you can import this from store. And now I'm saying, hey, I'm going to call this function select count to select my notifications dot count. This is important. Now that we have this select count, I'm actually going to call this select notifications count. Now that we are exporting this function, I'm going to go to my app.tsx, and here I can simply go and say const count equals, and here you can say use selector, which comes from React Redux, and then you can pass the select notifications count. Now I need to import that, so I can say import from React Redux, and here I can simply say use selector. Okay. Now use selector is provided, select notifications count has to be imported, so I'm going to import it from the store. And now you can see that we have got this guy right here. If you see the use selector, this is actually calling the select notifications count, which returns back a number. Now this count is essentially a number, so we can definitely render this. There's no problem with that. Now the button actions are supposed to be updated, so I'm going to actually make these functions empty for now, just to show you that we are still rendering the count from the state. So if I go to my app right now and refresh, you can see that the count here is 0. If I go to my slice right now and change this to 110, save this, the count is 110, which means we are in fact showing the data from Redux. Okay, so now that we have this, let's talk about dispatching actions to update the information. So for that, I'm going to go to my slice again, and here we have this increment and reset. We are exporting those. Now I need to go to my app.ts, and I'm going to use a use dispatch hook to actually have a dispatch function. So a component is supposed to only interact ideally with Redux store, and that's pretty much it. Doesn't have to do anything else. So I'm using the use selector hook from React Redux. Now I'm going to use another hook from React Redux, that is dispatch. So this is going to use the use dispatch from React Redux. So here I can use dispatch, which is right here. And then here I can just call this function. Now that I have this, this is the dispatch function that can take a particular action to dispatch. So here I can say, hey, whenever the increment button is clicked, I'm going to dispatch an action. Which action? Increment, coming from notification actions. Okay. And this is supposed to be called like this. So this means I'm actually importing the increment named export right here. And then I also want the reset, of course, but the actions are being exported. So I'm importing them right here in the app.tsx. And I'm also going to import reset as well. Now that I have those, I'm actually going to go and dispatch the other one from here as well. So let's call this reset. And now let's see what happens. So now if I refresh the application, this is the initial state. If I hit increment, look at that. You got counter/increment. What? Where did this come from? If you go to the slice, you're going to see that the name that we give to the slice is always used as a prefix for each action. So it's countered/increment. Let's call this notifications. And now if I click the increment, notifications/increment. So you can essentially give the name that you want here to be used as a prefix for all the actions of a particular slice. So when I click this button, let's actually use the debugger to see how to use the debugger. So if I click this action, you're going to see that the count value has become 111 from 110. You can see what kind of action it was. So the action had just a type property with the identifier of the name of the action, which is notifications/increment. You can also see what was the difference that happened with this action. Well, we changed from 110 to 111. You can keep doing this a couple of times, and every time there's going to be an action that changes the state. So you can actually go through it and see what changed with each particular action in this case. Now you can also play this so you can see the time travel debugging of what happened throughout your application and how the state changed. This is a really small application, but assume that you have a really complex application and you can actually see all of that. One more tip is that if you have too many logs to see, for example, if I keep doing this and then I do something else as well, and I just want to get rid of all of them, you just click this commit and then it removes everything. The state does not get resetted. Only the data from here is gone. You can still go and say state, and you can see there's nothing at the moment, but you can see it from here. You click here, you can see the count is 129, which is here. If we hit reset, we get the reset function or action dispatched, and you can see this was the action, notifications/reset. The state changed to count 0, and the diff was basically changed from 129 to 0. Now you can just keep playing around with this one. Okay, so I hope you understood the whole concept of how we implemented actions with Redux or Redux Toolkit especially, and then also how to debug them and see them in action. You can always go and debug. You're seeing me coding but not debugging anything because I've done it too many times. But essentially, if I just go here, this is the flow of the whole application. I'm gonna put a breakpoint here, and then I'm gonna go to the selectors.ts, which is right here, or actually here. And then I'm gonna also go to the slice.ts, which is right here. So increment and reset. What happens really? If I refresh the app, you're gonna see that this is triggered a few times. Oops. Now if I click increment, what is the first thing that happens? Well, I'm clicking a button, so the button's click handler gets basically triggered. So it's trying to dispatch an action called increment. From this action, the reducer automatically catches the action. So here the increment function basically caught the action that it was called, and then you can see the state.count was 110 shown right here, and then you can see I incremented it by 1. Once you do that, the incremented value is 111, and that gets rendered on the UI. Now if I click reset, you see that the reset button handler or click handler got triggered, and then if I proceed further, now it went to the reset reducer or the reducer function to set the count to 0. It set the count to 0. The component is basically selecting the value from the state using the selectors file. So if you remember, the selectors files right here is this function, and this function is being used, or the select notifications count is being used in app.tsx right here to get the count. So whenever the count changes in the store or in the state, this has to retrigger to get the count again and to re-render the count again. So now if I look at this, poop, it came to the selector, got the latest value of the count, which is 0. See on the UI, it's still 111. And then if I hit play, 0 gets rendered. Easy peasy. Cool. Now the last thing that I want to cover is side effects. So not every application is as cool as this one. Of course, it's more complex. You're not just resetting counters or incrementing counters, but you're also making API calls. All the crazy stuff like saving stuff to local storage, for example. How do we deal those sort of things? Because as I said, ideally a component should only be talking to the store. But as soon as you say, no, I'm going to actually have an API call to do something, then your component depends on something external, and that makes it a bit difficult to test that component as well. Well, you can always mock, for example, dependencies, but if they're just files, it becomes a bit difficult. I mean, you can still mock files with jest as well, but you get the idea. We need to keep the components as clean as possible, and if they're only communicating with the store with Redux, that's perfect. So we need to use something called a thunk. So I'm going to actually try to search thunk here. Create async thunk. Is that the one? Yeah, that's the one. So what we want to do is we want to have an API call that is going to reset the count. So let's say the increment is easy peasy. We increment the notifications count. I can see that, but the reset, that's the tricky one. Let's say that comes from an API. So I'm going to create a fake API inside the app. So I'm going to call this fake API.ts. And inside that we have a function as, let's say, export const. And here we have something like, reset count API, or recent count, let's say recent count from server. Let's say this function essentially returns a dummy promise, returns a new promise that essentially gets resolved after 200, or let's say 2000 milliseconds, 2 seconds that is. So let's say this has a set timeout of 2 seconds, and then we resolve the value and we say, let's say, I don't know, success true, for example. If that's the case that we are trying to do, then this is an async function which returns a promise. It says promise of unknown, but ideally this should be a promise of a particular type. So you could also type the value right here. So a promise that essentially returns an object that has a success of Boolean. So now the type is much nicer. Cool. Now that we have the function created, let's create an async thunk, and a thunk is an action. So you have now two kinds of actions. One that just goes to the store and updates the state. The other one is it doesn't update the state directly, but it goes to do some side effect. It goes to make an API call, update local storage, I don't know, starts or stops a set interval, those kind of things. So we call them thunk or async thunk. Now in this particular case, we already have from the Redux toolkit a way of using a create async thunk. So I'm going to actually copy this code and I'm going to go to my slices, which is right here, notifications, notification slice.ts. And here you're going to create an async thunk right here. We're going to call this reset count via API. This is an action, just like increment and reset. Now these are, it's really confusing to decide, what is an action and what is a reducer, but these are essentially reducer functions. We export actions from here. So let's say, yeah, we have this reducer function at the moment. Now these are the actions that we have. What we want to do is to create a thunk. So I'm going to import this create async thunk from Redux Toolkit. Then I'm going to give it a name. Now this unfortunately does not take the name directly from here. So you're going to say notifications, and here you can say reset count via API, for example. Now I don't really need to pass anything to it, so I'm going to remove all of this. And then what I want to do is I just want to await in here, and I want to do reset count via API. Not this one actually. What was the other one that we did in the fake API? So reset count from server. From fake API, let's do that. From fake API. Yeah, that's the one. That's the one I'm looking for. So in this case, I'm going to go to the slice, and here I'm going to say reset count from fake API. I'm going to import this from fake API. And once I get something out from it, the response essentially has a success. So I'm going to just say success. Now that I have this, I can create a reducer to see what happens when this guy really changes, for example, or we have some data from it. Now, what I want to really do is in my store or in my slice actually, not only I want a count, but I also want the status for when I'm making the API call. The API call or any promise has three different states: pending, fulfilled, rejected. So I want to show some text, let's say, on my reset button when I'm making the API call via server. So I have three different states. So I can say the status, or we can say reset status. This could be, or the type of this would be as follows. We could have loading, we could have error, error, and then we could also have, for example, idle. So then I have to give a default value here. So reset status is essentially idle by default. And now that I have this, I can also see that in Vite, when I try to see Redux, so if I go here, look at Redux, look at state, when I click here, you can see that not only I have count, but I also have reset status, which is idle. Now that I have that, I want to change this accordingly. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually go and say, hey, I want extra reducers. Please don't ask me why they decided to say extra reducers. Yeah, it's React is weird. We have issues and then we solve them by creating more issues. So these are reducers, which are essentially functions that update the state directly. The extra reducers essentially use a builder to create some cases. So here you're going to essentially say builder dot add case. And here you're going to say, hey, whenever this recent count via API is in progress, I want you to change the status to loading. So I want to do this by doing something like this. I'm going to say reset count API dot And here you have the pending because it's a promise, or it's a function that returns promise, or is it essentially this is an async thunk. I can basically say this. And then what I do is I have a function and that can get a state, and then it's really similar to the other things we have right here. So here I just want to say state dot reset status equals, and I want to make it loading. Okay, I hope this makes sense so far. So I'm saying, hey, I'm using this async thunk or a thunk to have my state changed whenever it's pending. Then I also will just add case on top of it. So I'm going to say add case, and now here I can say whenever the reset count from API or via API is fulfilled. When that's the case, you need to reset the status to idle, and then similarly if it's rejected, then I just want to change this to error. Okay, if that makes sense. So now that we have this, we actually have actions that can work to do this, to achieve this. So what I want to do now is I will actually increase the timer in our fake API. Let's change this to 3 seconds, for example. And now if I go back to my slice here, I'm going to also export the action. So again, this needs to be exported. So I need to say export const reset count API because I need to call this directly or dispatch this directly. Now that we have this, let's quickly go to the app tsx, and here instead of using the reset function, I'm going to call the reset count via API, and I'm going to just import this from notification slice. Now this is an async thunk. As soon as you put it here, it's gonna go crazy and would say, what are you trying to do? You can only have easy peasy actions or normal actions with dispatch, but not thunks. In order to fix that, what you need to do is you need to give this use dispatch a type using the generics, and that's gonna be the app dispatch that we already have in the store. So in here, if you go to your store file, we are exporting the root state, which we already used a couple of times, but we also have the app dispatch. This is important, otherwise thunks, they don't work. So in here, now I'm not using the reset function, but I'm using reset count by API. The file is happy, dispatch is happy, everything looks good. So now what I really want to do is this button says reset. I want to change that. But before I change that, I want to just see if this changes throughout. So now if I increment, it increments. I've incremented a couple of times, commit. Now if I do reset, let's see what happens. You see we got reset count by API. After 3 seconds, we also got another action. Ooh, what's that? If I click here, you can see that this action, which was pending, essentially got the difference in state and it changed the reset status from idle to loading. This is our code, which essentially is the first builder case, this one. As soon as it got pending, the reset status changed to loading. Then we got another action that changed loading to idle, which means the action was actually fulfilled. Since after 3 seconds we resolve the data from our fake API, which is right here, after 3 seconds we resolve it, we resolve this, the thunk essentially gets resolved, it returns back response success, and then we essentially say, all right, this is fulfilled. So if you look at this whole situation, the request status fulfilled, the state got changed, the change was from loading to idle. Okay, so we are having our sort of data in the state being changed as well. Let's say something goes wrong, and then what happens? So if I go to my fake API and say, hey, instead of resolving this, let's use a rejection. So I can say reject, and then here instead of resolve, let's say we reject with something like could not reset count. If that's the case, then if I do reset, after 3 seconds is gonna actually result in an error. Now you can see the loading basically changed to error. And that is because the action dispatched was rejected. So if your API call fails for any reason, if there's a 400 or 4xx or 5xs, whatever that is essentially going to change the state to error. And this is the latest state as of now. So now that I have this, I want to reflect these changes into my reset button. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually get another selector created and then use that. So I'm going to create another selector. I'm going to say select reset status. and I'm going to say instead of .count, the reset status, and then I'm going to use that into app.tsx. So here I can say const reset status equals use selector. So I'm going to use the use selector and use the select reset status. I need to import this. Now that I import this, I can use this reset status right here. So let's say I just put it around reset like this. You can see that here it says reset idle. If I click this, loading and error, there we go. In the case of success, that would be different. So what I want to do is, if this is idle, I want to say reset. Otherwise, I want to basically change the text. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to see what is the nicer way to do this. So let's say in here we say this guy right here. Let's say that the reset status is idle. If that's the case, then we use the reset. Otherwise, we have either loading or error, right? This is where it gets a bit trickier. So I actually want to create a function to do this. So I'm going to say const reset button text, and in here I basically want to go. I mean, I could also have created just a component for this one to render this, but I'm just going to be lazy and do this. So here I'm going to say if the reset status right now status is, and you can see that the TypeScript is so nice. It just lets me do all the crazy things. So if it's idle, then I just want to return the value reset. Or I could actually use a switch now that I think about it. So switch. Here we can say reset status. And here we can then say, hey, if the value is idle, then we want to return reset. I don't want a break there. Then we can also remove this guy from here. And then we can simply say, hey, if it's idle, then do this. If it's loading, then we do loading. And then if it's error, then I want to basically do something about it. Now you can go one step further, and then you can also use the error that is being used in the reject to display that directly. For example, here the fake API rejects with an error message. You can actually take that and put into the state as well if you want. I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to say something went wrong, for example, here. Or we could say even I think in the case of error, we should still change this to reset in this case, but then have some sort of alert or something. That's what I'm thinking, but I'm gonna keep this easy for now. If they both have the same situation, then I would actually go and put that right here. And in the case of loading, we have loading. So I'm gonna actually use the reset button text right here, just like this. And I'm going to also format this a bit nicely so I can sleep well at night. Now that I have this, if I go here, you can see if I click reset, we have loading. And then we change it back to reset, but you can obviously use an alert or something like that to show some alert in this case. You would most likely handle all of that in an async thunk. So if you go to your slice, here is where you might want to put an alert that says, you know, something really went wrong. So you can put a try catch here, try, and then you can say catch. Let's put the try code here. And then if you got an error, you can take out the alert error dot message. Now you need to say this is error as error dot message. And once you have that message, then you can continue throwing this error. So it gets forward into the builder here and then sets the status as well. If you don't do this, then you're catching the error here. So it ends here. So we don't want to do that. So let's try this out now. So I'm going to do reset, and I'm going to also put some breakpoints so we can see all of that. So I'm going to go to the slice file, and then here, let's put a breakpoint here and one here. So I click that, it goes here, it tries to do something. Now it should wait for about 3 seconds. Now you can see that we caught the error because we are rejecting. Now the error here is could not reset count. So here we have error.message. And you can see undefined because this error that we are actually rejecting is sad. We should be saying new error, and in here you could say, yeah, could not reset count. That would be much nicer. So if I click reset, goes here, now it should throw an error that we should catch. And now you can see the error right here, and then we can take out the message. So could not reset count, as you can see right here. And now that I have this, I would also see the error here because I'm forwarding this. So that means if I hit play, it comes here, and then now since we have an error, it's gonna reset in this case. So this is important to have that. Now if you want to set something else on the error as well, you could also do that, but as I said, I'm not gonna do that in this particular case. Also, I'm gonna put this back here, and once we have successful situation, we should also be resetting the count. Now in the case of, let's say, rejection, you have noticed that the button gets back to its state, but this value is not updated. It's still 110. In the case of success, let's say, this should basically be set to 0 again. So if I do reset, loading, and there we go. Now you see that in this particular case, we don't really update the state at all. So we need to do that. So you need to go to slice, and here on the case of fulfill, not only we set this to idle again, we also say the state dot count equals 0. So we also need to do that. Now we reset. It's going to take 3 seconds, and there we go. So this has been changed to 0. So now you know how to actually work with Redux. You also know how to work with normal actions versus an async thunk action as well. And if you look at Redux, this is essentially the same thing that we have covered in depth, looking at the debug status as well, and also the best practices when it comes to the code as well. So I hope you found this video useful. If you did, press the thumbs up button. Let me know in the comments what you think about this video, or what was the thing that you actually learned, and what is your favorite state management library. Is it Redux? Is it Zoostan? Have you tried something else? And if there are more topics that you can think of that I should create videos on, let me know in the comment as well. For some reason, YouTube thinks that you're gonna like this video, so give it a go, and I'm gonna see you in the next one.